Scholastique Langlois de TRAVERSY, born May 20th, 1813, in De Montagne, Saint-Benoît, Quebec. She would marry Felix VIAU. According to census, he was a farmer and laborer. The family were Roman Catholics. Both Scholastique and Felix could read and write. Interestingly enough, their daughter, Évariste, would marry a Tauvet, just like their son Hercule did. Furthermore, their grandson, Dorima VIAU, son of Hercule, married a Courtemanche bride, like his great-grandson Joseph VIAU did. Like Felix, Scholastique was the first of the Langlois to migrate from Quebec to Ontario after a long line of family living in Nouveau France. Together, they would have children every couple of years over a 2-decade period, giving birth to a flock of 11 VIAUs. What was life like for Scholastique growing up in Quebec? Well, being born in 1813, she came into the world during a time of turmoil as the War of 1812 was still underway, and the Americans very much wanted Canadian land. In 1814, with Napoleon defeated, the British could afford to send more troops to Quebec, culminating in the burning of Washington as the British invaded the capital. During this time, it was assumed that American troops would be greeted as liberators, guaranteeing them an easy conquest. Thomas Jefferson believed that taking Canada as far as Quebec would simply be a mere matter of marching, and would give them the experience to attack Halifax, the next and final expulsion of England from the American continent. Needless to say, it wasn't that easy. In 1812, Canada had around 500,000 inhabitants, 2/3 of whom were French-speaking and living in Quebec. Upper Canada, now known as Southern Ontario, had a population of less than 75,000, primarily Loyalist exiles and recent immigrants from the northeastern U.S. These former Americans were extremely hostile to the United States and uninterested in the politics. Eventually, an absence of local backing prevented the American forces from establishing a foothold in Canada. With nearly a dozen attempts to invade Upper Canada between 1812 and 1814, the vast majority of them ended in failure. In 1813, Major General Wade Hamilton was to march north from Lake Champlain and join a force under General James Wilkinson that would sail from Sackett's Harbor on Lake Ontario and descend the St. Lawrence. Charles de Salaberry would defeat Hampton's force of 4,000 at the Chateauguay River with a smaller force of Canadian Voltigeurs and Mohawk First Peoples. Around 5 years later, after the events like the Battle of Chateauguay, the frontier between British and American lands would be created at the 49th Northern Parallel in the year 1818. It's 1824. Scholastique's father, François Langlois de Traversy, passes away. She is only 11 years old. Around 5 years later, in 1829, McGill University begins instruction with the Faculty of Medicine. It's 1836. Scholastique's first child, Henriette, is born. Scholastique is 23 years old. During this year, laws are established for so-called normal schools in the country. These schools would have been the first secular, public, free schools of Lower Canada. Around 4 years earlier, in 1832, the first cholera epidemic kills 6,000 people in Montreal. Also in 1832, new equality laws are established following the 1808 expulsion of Ezekiel Hart, a Jew. The Legislative Assembly of Quebec passes a law giving full political rights to the Jewish citizens of Lower Canada. It is known as the 1832 Emancipation Act. It is the first in the British Empire, and some 27 years before Great Britain would instill similar laws. It's 1837. A year after her daughter is born, Scholastique's mother, Scholastique Brunette de Latong, dies in June. By November, things would seem a bit brighter as Scholastique marries Felix VIAU. However, in the surrounding lands of Montreal, conflicts arise as paramilitary groups seek equality. These conflicts escalate in November, culminating in the Battle of Saint Eustache on December 14th. During this tumultuous time, martial law was proclaimed in Montreal. This was a battle between patriots and rebels fighting for control and the power to help shape the nation's future. It's 1841. Hercule is born. Scholastique is 28. It is her fifth child with Felix. In 1855, their last child, Angelina, would be born. Scholastique is 41. Unfortunately, Angelina passes away at 2 months old. Sometime after the 1861 census, Scholastique and Felix moved to Ontario. In 1867, following the Great Coalition, upon the request of its colonial representatives, the British North American Act is passed by the Parliament of Great Britain. Rather than remain a colony of Great Britain, the citizens of Quebec vote to join with New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Ontario to create the nation of Canada. Nearly a decade later, in 1879, the rules of hockey were invented, established by 3 students at McGill University. It's 1887. Felix VIAU passes away at age 79 in Ontario. In 1891, at age 77, the census lists Scholastique as a domestic servant living in a different household in Ontario. Around this time, Montreal would see its first electric streetcars. A few years later, January 14, 1894, Scholastique passes away at age 80 in Clarence Creek, Russell, Ontario, Canada.